Hello, Minder patrons. Today we're going to talk about erasers. This is another studio tips video, particularly as it relates to watercolor paper. And we're just going to review some erasers in general, and I'm going to give you my thoughts. I'm not going to review every kind of eraser out there, but we are going to take a look at these and just talk about what they are and what they do. I have watercolor paper actually right here. And I've got charcoal pencil here, which at least I rarely use with watercolor, but just for demonstration's sake, we're going to give ourselves a pretty challenging erasing situation. And this is like a 6B pencil up here. Now, actually, it's an 8B pencil, so these are dark pencils. When I draw on watercolor paper, I draw very lightly. So at first, I'm just going to talk about the erasers I use on watercolor paper, and that's kneaded. I always go to kneaded first, a kneadable eraser. I think everybody who's ever done basic drawing knows what a kneadable eraser is. It's sort of drawing 101. You can make it any shape. You can erase a broad area. You can mold it down to a little fine point. It doesn't work very well on dark stuff like this, but I rarely draw on watercolor paper that dark. I usually am drawing something very softly and very faintly. And I'm either transferring it by a light box that way, or I'm drawing directly on my paper. And I'm putting very little pressure, because the more pressure you put, the more you push those graphite particles into the paper. And in a case like that, a kneaded eraser works very well, and it's very gentle on the paper. That's always my first go-to. Now, second, if I need to do a little more vigorous erasing, erase a broad area, it's really hard to beat a polymer eraser. This is a Pentel, this is a Stettler, and these are two I think of the best. They're gentle. You can usually apply pretty good pressure and it still won't hurt the watercolor paper, okay? And the crumbs are minimal, so that's an advantage. So 90% of my erasing is done there. I just want to address some of the other erasers that are out there, and I'm kind of a chronic experimenter, so I'm always buying something that I see this new, and 9 times out of 10 it's like, oh well, that's not that new. These two, this is called an eraser stone. I think it's polymer to a degree. It's very similar to this in feel, kind of a plasticky feel, but it just has a softer kind of finish to it. So first let's go up and down this and see what we got. This is kneaded. Just take one of these polymer erasers. This is a standard plastic or polymer eraser. You can see that does a pretty good job. This is the stone eraser. And by the way, as an aside, if you don't have a crumb brush, you should have. And I always take, when I'm erasing, and I brush the crumbs towards me, and I pull a wastebasket up to the edge of my drawing board. You probably can't see this on video. And I just sweep it off the edge into my wastebasket. Very, very, very useful. And I do use that all the time, just to sweep eraser crumbs and debris off my drawing board. If you don't have this, just an old house paint brush works fine too. So kneaded polymer. I started seeing these black erasers crop up, and I read reviews that they're meant to work on really dark black pencil. Frankly, I cannot see how they're any better than a polymer eraser, and they produce more crumbs. So there again, the good old standby polymer plastic eraser seems to do the trick. Many of you may be familiar with gum erasers. and they have more of a rubbery, kind of a textury feel, almost a dusty feel to them. They erase pretty well. Their claim to fame is that they produce probably the least crumbs of any. So it has that going for it. And it produces crumbs in a one long string. Like that. That's supposedly what a gum eraser does. Performance wise, they don't outperform the polymer erasers, in my opinion. Now, I'm racing pretty hard, and the question I get a lot is, can you do that on watercolor paper? Is there a problem with that? I've never found a problem on really high quality cotton watercolor paper. Now, I don't tempt fate. I try not to erase that way on watercolor paper if I don't have to, but should you need to, I would, as opposed to wasting a sheet of paper because you messed up a drawing, I would do it and just see what happens. You may have seen these. There's a lot of these kind of things out there. I love taking this in the field. This is called a Papermate Tough Stuff Eraser Stick. And it's just, gives you some detailed erasing. It's the same material as in a standard polymer eraser. Okay? Just allows you to get smaller. And you can erase on one edge and turn it over and erase on the other, and effectively you're sharpening your eraser by doing that. This is just another version using the larger eraser, round eraser stick. This is called a Pentel Click Eraser. These polymer erasers are great because they smudge, I think, the least of any. I haven't had any of these kinds smudge either, but just not found any other advantage to them. This is something that it's not used much anymore, but it's an imbibed eraser. Now this is, I forget what this is called. It's some sort of eraser stick. It allows you to use these. If you remember, or maybe you don't know, but the old style electric erasers, and I'll show you one in a minute, use these, the corded erasers, which you can hardly even find anymore. You have to go on eBay to find one. But you can also get this kind of thing, and this is by Sakura, and it just grips these replaceable eraser refills. An imbibed eraser, this was used to erase ink off of film. A lot of drafting was done back in the day. You don't find that much anymore, but I used it, for illustration. If I had ink and I was trying to get ink off, it would dim the ink. It usually wouldn't take it all out, but that's what that was, is an imbibed eraser. But you can pull this out and put in a standard polymer refill. But it becomes basically like that, these little click erasers. So let's talk about electric erasers for a minute. If I'm doing a lot of drawing, a lot of detailed drawing, I will employ electric erasers. And here's basically two. This is about, I think I paid about $12 or $13 for this. This is about double the cost. There is a quality difference. Usually you get these that are around, on Amazon, they're around 7, 8, 9, 10. They don't work on heavy pencil, as you can see here. They might help clean up something you've already erased. And this one is just kind of so-so. I bought one called what was that called? A Helix. It's pretty cheap, and that thing fell apart. Didn't last any time. This is not much better. These batteries are probably starting to go, but they still have some juice in them. But there's not much torque. So I bought this because it was, I mean, it's twice the price, but it was more highly rated. Spins at a much higher speed. Now these batteries are fresh, so this one is new for me. So the jury is still out on whether this is worth double the price, but every review I read says it is. This is a Sakura electric eraser. Now, all that said, I don't recommend, again, unless it's a last resort, I don't recommend electric erasers on watercolor paper. You know, use them to your heart's content on the preliminary drawings that you're doing on other paper. But while a good quality paper, and this one seems to be holding up fine, probably won't be affected that much. Still, don't tempt fate. You never know. It doesn't take much for something to change the surface of the paper and thus change the wash. Now, I want to add an addendum in there. I love these. These are old school, and I know these are like humongous. You can't buy these anymore, hardly. The last one I saw for sale was made by Stettler, and every site that has these listed now says that they're not made anymore by the manufacturer. While it's corded, it's large, it's cumbersome. I like knowing that I have one of these in the studio, and I made sure, I used to have a battery operated one. It was large like this, and the battery gave out, so I went and bought this off of eBay, this corded one. I like knowing I have it in the studio. It's one of those things that when you need a heavy duty eraser, if you're doing a major correction on something, you're glad you have it, even though you may not use it maybe more than 3 or 4 times a year, if that. But these you just can't buy new anymore. But it uses the same refills as the stick thing here. So they go in here. We put one of the polymer refills in. Just put them in. This slides up, tightens around it. And voila. I just about stripped the hide off a cow with one of these. And that's charcoal. You know, these soft pencils are the worst because the soft graphite particles get down into the paper. So it's difficult to get it out. Now, the reason, and I know, you know, it just depends on what type of painting you do. If you do really tight painting, you probably do a lot of preliminary drawing. So this eraser things may be important to you. If you're a real fast, loose, washy painter, you may do almost no drawing. But it's still good to know what's available and what you can do with it. Now, one thing about electric erasers, they can actually be used to a degree to lighten watercolor. Also, you need to know about eraser shields. So these are prime tools for using with electric eraser. I have 2 different ones, and you got all kind of little shapes. And it's just a metal shield that goes down over something, and then you erase over that shield. And you get a very accurate little erasure. You know, you can use parts of a shape. If you want to erase an edge. So there, I've been able to erase an edge. They were big in use with this kind. If you're going to erase a big area, it's good to use one of these. So, eraser shields. Now, let's bring this home specifically to watercolor you can actually use electric erasers for highlights. And with a eraser shield, like I was just showing you, it makes it a little more effective. Now first I'm just going to show you, and again I don't like this one so much because the torque on it is not very good. It will depend a bit on how staining your watercolor is. And just to be clear, electric eraser will not remove all the paint, it just usually will lighten it, because a lot of it's getting into the surface. And one of the things you can do is you can lift, you can do some wet and wet scrubbing and lifting, and then let your paper completely dry. Don't erase wet paper. Then go, let's see, this area here has been lifted. Go back to an area where you want a nice hot highlight. In fact, let's get this little eraser shield involved here. Now these eraser shields really chew up your eraser, so a lot of times you're pulling your refill out, sticking it back in. Nevertheless, you can see what it's done. So you've got a lot of eraser options out there. It's good to have them in the studio. In general, as I said, on watercolor paper, I try to stay light with my drawing, light with my erasers. On drawing paper, when you're working out a composition or drawing, go to town, do whatever you want. But primarily, I see these polymer erasers and these kneadable erasers as being about the only thing you really need. Oh, and one last comment on kneadables. They can get quite dirty. You can notice this one's dirtier than that. They can get quite dirty and still be effective. And the way you clean kneadable, in case you didn't know, is just by stretching it and remolding it. See, it gets cleaner in the areas where you stretch it. You can actually, I don't think I have ever replaced a kneaded eraser because it was too dirty. I usually replace them because I lose them. Alright, so if you have any questions about erasers and drawing, and specifically as it relates to watercolor, I hope you put them in the comments. Hope that's a help. See you in the next video.